Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to another Big Gold Bell movie review brought to you from the Toronto International Film Festival. Now, this is a film that a lot of people have been waiting for all year to come out, and this one is The Smashing Machine, and it's directed by Benny Safdie. It stars Dwayne Johnson, Emily Blunt, and Ryan Badger. And here's a quick synopsis. MMA fighter Mark Kerr reaches the peak of his career but faces personal hardships. Now, Benny has been, if you loved Uncut Gems, and a multitude of his movies, which I think are absolutely brilliant. For him to even take on a sports movie and him to take on the story of Mark Kerr, and for it to be starring The Rock, which is what everyone's here to see, this dramatic turn that The Rock gives out in his performance. And the first thing I'll say about The Smashing Machine is that it's definitely worth coming to see if you're here for Rock's performance. Him and Emily Blunt, who, if they did Jungle Cruise together, so it's some form of chemistry already there. Here, it is a toxic, tragic chemistry that they have as he plays Mark Kerr and she plays Mark Kerr's wife. And it is a lot to look at and a lot to grasp exactly what was going on in their personal relationship. But we'll first say that The Smashing Machine only takes place for 3 years of Mark Kerr's life. I think they say from 97 to 2000. That is it. It does not explore anything past that pivotal point in Mark Kerr's life here. So a lot of the tragic story that we know of Mark Kerr, some of it happened well beyond those years, and some of it happened before this time period. But when we jump into this point of his career, of him fighting Pride and him fighting in the UFC at the same time, we understand this is where a lot of his drug issues came up of, a lot of abusing narcotics came up of, and this toxic relationship he had with Don came up at this exact same time here. Now, the story just really focuses on more of the training aspects of Mark Kerr and everything he had to do to prepare himself for these fights, and then him traveling for this stuff. And we get to see, which I was more shocked about because it was talked about that this film would take The Rock out of his comfort zone, but a lot of it feels more in his lane and in his comfort zone when we get to see the training cycles that Mark goes through here. That is where The Rock is extremely comfortable at. When we get to the performance aspects of this film, he is brilliant in just displaying the emotion from Mark Kerr, down to him looking like Mark Kerr and nailing Mark Kerr's voice, which is as far from The Rock's as humanly possible. And he absolutely nails that. As it becomes just embodying Mark Kerr, this is what The Rock does. And this is something that is thoroughly impressive. And you would have been impressed if any actor does this with a real life figure, where you're able to embody who that person is. And that's what The Rock does here in this very dramatic turn for him, because The Smashing Machine is not an easy watch, and it will not be an easy watch for a lot of people. At times, it does show the brutalness of MMA and combat sports, but also just the toxic relationship between Mark and Don in this film, and the things that it leads to is also another level of uncomfortability for a lot of people who are going to watch this film. But Benny does a great job of never shying away from that and showing just enough of it for you to understand Mark's mental state as he's going through all of these fights. Now, do I wish we would have got some moments in the film shown that were talked about? Absolutely. I think you could have went way more dramatic in certain points with Mark's actual story than we get in this film here. This film is way more of a vehicle. It feels like a vehicle to show that The Rock can act, more than a vehicle to tell a complete story of Mark Kerr. And while his story is vast, and that could be why you want to shrink it down to 3 years, even within those 3 years, I think it was more moments that could have been shown to show an audience who Mark Kerr was. It just feels that it gets to a point where it's way more about the performance than it is about the man. And while that can work a lot of times in films, I think here it's to the detriment of the movie that we don't get to see more of that. But when we do get to see The Rock with Emily Blunt as playing these two tragic characters, that's some of the best highlights you're going to see of this movie here, because you fully understand how bad their relationship is. Even when it comes to Mark sneaking around with drugs and things of this nature, like these are things that are shown here that really highlight the struggle of what it was and what he had to put his body through just to be able to compete in these tournaments. And that was something, again, that needs to be shown on screen. Granted, it could have been shown to a greater extent, you could have possibly went beyond that 3-year point just to show the audience more and to actually play more with The Rock's range. If you go beyond that 3-year period, but keeping it so indexed into that 3-year period, I think at times it makes the movie struggle. And it's never a bad movie. It's as far from a bad movie as you can get, but it could have been a great movie. And it's not that. And I think that's the issue with The Smashing Machine, is that this could have been a great movie. It doesn't even go into detail to explain to people why Mark Kerr was called The Smashing Machine. It's literally a reason why. And the film does not touch on that reason. And it felt like a lost moment that the film didn't touch on that reason. But again, if you're just here for performances, if you're here questioning if The Rock can actually act, as people who I'm assuming never saw The Rundown or Pain and Gain, or even Be Cool, to know that he can show range if necessary. But here it's just that dramatic range that he pulls off as Mark Kerr that really works wonders for this film here. And again, it's because as an MMA fighter, it's certain explosions you're going to get from Mark Kerr that don't have to be an overly explosion of emotions, but you fully understand where we're at and who he is. And I think that's what works wonders with this film, and what will either get The Rock a lot of awards attention, but it should definitely get Emily Blunt awards attention, because she is masterful as Dawn in this movie here. And she pushes The Rock to be just as masterful as Mark in this film. That, again, feels short on story because you only give us that 3-year period where you feel like you could have given so much more of the Mark Kerr story, and we don't get that. So in the end, you're going to be here just for the performances and of Mark's 3-year stretch here, and that's going to be it. And it's going to leave you wanting more. I guess that's also a positive part of the film, but it will leave you wanting to know more about Mark, and possibly you will research why this movie is named The Smashing Machine and who he was in the MMA circles. It doesn't even focus on the point that he was like the first heavyweight champion of the UFC. It brings up the UFC, but doesn't really focus enough on that to really push forward that aspect of it. It focused way more of his Pride career than his UFC career. But then still probably you would have to talk about why the UFC portion slowed down and why Pride kicked up. And it could lead to you understanding more about the drug use that we see and the toxic relationship there. Like so many different elements that could have been shown, but that just wasn't. It's not the worst thing in the world, but you just could have wanted more out of this film. But The Smashing Machine, brought to you from the Toronto Film Festival and A24. I believe this movie releases October the 3rd in the US. I want to say I'm right about that. Out of a possible 10, I'm going to give Smashing Machine an 8 out of 10. The Rock gives the performance that is necessary, and you fully understand once you see this film why this performance is talked about in the way that it is. But the performance that's not talked about enough is Emily Blunt's performance as Dawn. That is masterwork there, what she pulls off with Dawn in this film here. And just to show that toxic relationship between them two and how it affected Mark's career, that was a very smart move. Again, you just wish you'd have gotten more of Mark's actual story instead of now having to go and do research after the film to get Mark's story. Because I think Rock could have carried way more weight to give you even a bigger performance than what we get in this film. But what you do get in this film is one of the best performances of the year. But check it out when it drops. Let us know what you think. This has been another Big Gold Belt movie review from the Toronto International Film Festival. Peace, people.